Hello and welcome to another Solo Thoughts episode. Today's topic is how come the From Software games do not prominently display parrying in these games? And of course, Sekiro is based on deflecting, but it's not exactly parrying. And here's one thing that's really odd about Sekiro is that I don't get a whole lot of, very engaging or satisfaction out of parrying in Sekiro other than Makiri counters. The Makiri counters, in my opinion, works very similar to parrying, but is actually still very generous. Now, I wanted to go through my parry tutorials that I recorded. It wasn't really much of a challenge. I just kind of went in there to show every parry tutorial, and so this was before I wanted to do a bunch of challenges. There was still challenge there, but I could have taken it a bit further. But it came out to 4 minutes, the longest one being Sekiro, I think, because it was just, of course, the deflection and repos was whatever, just pretty much the entire thing. It wasn't really Sekiro is just once you kind of get the deflection rhythm down, the game's really not that complicated. You just kind of just deflect at the rhythm of the enemy's movement, and once you kind of get that down, Sekiro is just basically it's just hardly anything. And so with Demon Souls doesn't really, unless you're reading all the messages, you're not gonna stumble across it. The game never, none of the games force you to parry until Sekiro, obviously, it's deflect with that whatever. So in Demon Souls, it's just a simple message, and conveniently, there's an enemy that, of course, attacks you, and you just simply parry it, and that's it. I don't know. I'm wondering how many people actually use the parry option. I want to say maybe, I don't know, if it is 50-50 a good, assumption. How many people actually use the parry tool on their first playthrough of Demon Souls? And so we move on to Dark Souls 2, and it's even worse. You get to the Asylum Demon boss fog gate, and the parry tutorial is off to the side. You have to go out of your way to get there, but most people, they're going to be like, oh shoot, Asylum Demon, and then most people will probably just miss it entirely. You got two enemies. You got one that has a spear, and you got one that just has a sword, and that's it. That's your parry tutorial, which, getting used to the spear attacks is actually a good way to learn how to parry very sudden attacks, because thrusting is actually one of my main weaknesses that I actually learned how to adapt a lot better with the Godskin Noble in Elden Ring, believe it or not. And so that's just one thing that I've improved on over time is just thrusting attacks. Those things, if anything was going to kill me in any of these games, it was going to be an enemy using thrusting attacks. So in Dark Souls 2 was probably a little bit better because they were on tombstones. They were a little bit easier to see. However, it's right beside another tombstone that introduces drop attacks. So the thing is about this, I think the drop attack is just way too distracting. Actually, there's a third tombstone. Looking at the footage now, I don't even know what that tombstone presents actually. So players, they're going to get too distracted killing these two enemies and drop attacking one of them. It's actually another tombstone in there. Heck, I don't even know what all these do. I only remember the drop attack one, and of course the parry one. And so, yeah, I think this is another design where the game design is basically telling you, oh, parrying is not really a big deal. It's just an option. It's so strange to me how these games just do not promote parrying because it's a very satisfying mechanic. This is one thing I was definitely humbled by, and Sekiro helped me appreciate the parrying more, even though Sekiro doesn't exactly have the most satisfying deflection mechanics. Like I said, the Makiri counter was pretty much the most satisfying part, but the deflecting is just pretty much just a rhythm. It's almost like kind of just running and jumping, almost like in Dark Souls or whatever. I know that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I'm just making comparison. Deflecting is just really just a part of the flow of the combat, and it's just basically running around or something like that, just getting your maneuvering right. It's just part of that combination. And Bloodborne is probably the worst out of all these, because you get one part in the Hunter's Dream, and that's just the riposte. That has nothing. It doesn't tell you anything about parrying. It just lets you know whenever a boss is staggered to go in for a riposte. The parry tutorial is actually in where the lantern is at the very beginning, and you won't see it because it's in a corner, and I don't think it even pops up until you get to the hunter's dream. So it's just shooting is, I don't know. It feels like shooting was very important in Bloodborne, but for some reason they just didn't. They just wanted to hide it, and I guess they maybe, I don't know. Maybe they assumed people thought it was going to be obvious. I mean, yeah, maybe the developers thought players would find it obvious to parry, and maybe that's why they didn't make it entirely important to make a big tutorial out of it or anything very mandatory. I mean, it shouldn't be mandatory, but however, there should be a very good example. And really, the example I used was just the werewolf, and it's not exactly the best enemy to practice on. I think the ogres is probably the best enemy to parry with because they're telegraphed, their attacks are telegraphed extremely well. Moving on to Dark Souls 3, and Dark Souls 3 is basically kind of like Dark Souls 1, where it's kind of just pushed off to the side, and you gotta be careful. It's got the worst. It's got a really bad setup. It's not the worst, but and you got steps, and if you parry the enemy, the steps is gonna knock you offline. It's gonna knock you off the registering window area because if you parry on steps, you can't get a riposte unless it's just right. I remember I had to on the video that I got for it. It had to be just so in order to get the riposte. So definitely just even worse than Dark Souls 1 just because of that design flaw. Now here in Sekiro, you like I said, the deflection rhythm just makes the game nothing. I'm really surprised that a lot of people still to this day have a lot of trouble with Sekiro because I mean, what helped me was playing while listening to Kickstart Your Heart by Motley Crue while just fighting regular enemies, and it just kind of clicked. And ever since then, Sekiro's just really just haven't been a big problem for me. I've only go back just for very specific challenges like these every aspect sort of challenges I like to push onto myself. But I must say that the mini boss at the very end of the Sekiro deflection tutorial, Parry whatever, is actually pretty good. It's just he's not too challenging, but he definitely displays how everything should work in terms of deflecting and attacking in between. And so yeah, I mean tutorial bosses shouldn't be overly complicated, but however they should be entertaining every time you go through the game. And so he's not overly boring, but you can skip him if you want to. I think you can. Let me go back. I might be lying. I think you can't skip him. Can you? Oh heck, I don't even remember that small detail. I think you do have to. I'm trying to see if there's a path over here to the right, but I can't. Sorry. I cannot remember this right. I could have swore that you could skip him sometimes. Yeah, I think you can't skip him. Sorry, I don't want to get hung up on that. But yeah, out of all of them, I mean, it seems like such an obvious choice, but Sekiro definitely has the best parry tutorial because the whole game is based on parrying, and even then, Sekiro should have been a lot better in terms of displaying how deflection works and the deflection rhythm. However, I think I think their goal was to have the player organically discover it by playing. But however, there's a lot of players to this day that still cannot click with Sekiro because there's just something in there that's just not really getting them. I mean, heck, I stopped playing Sekiro for 2 years because I just really couldn't get into the deflection rhythm. I couldn't find it. And I tried several methods because I kept having dreams about the game, and simply listening to "Kickstart Your Heart" by Motley Crue worked for me. And it's just it feels like an external solution that really should have something like maybe during practice they should have had like a song playing that kind of had like a good tempo in terms of deflecting and attacking, like do 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 do, I don't know, something like that. I think that would have worked out well. I don't know. What are your opinions on that? So Elden Ring, we're going to wrap up with Elden Ring. The parry tutorial with Elden Ring is just, what can I say, is terrible. I mean, for the longest time, I wasn't even sure where it was. And I had to give Twilight credit for this one. He pointed out that shouldn't it be skills? I mean, you press L2, and plus parrying in Elden Ring is considered a skill. Ash of War, whatever, I believe it's considered Ash of War. So definitely had to thank Twilight for that one. Thanks, man. So the pop up does come up, and right after you simply got an enemy that you just parry, and then that's it. I mean, it would be more interesting if there was like maybe 2 or 3 enemies that you kind of had to parry, similar to Dark Souls. But in terms of quality of this tutorial is probably right next to Bloodborne. It's just really, well, actually, maybe right beside Dark Souls 3, because Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 are probably the bottom worst parry tutorials in the series. So anyway, let me know what you think. Which ones do you think any of these actually beat Sekiro in your opinion? I would definitely like to hear your thoughts on this topic, and thank you very much, and have a great weekend.